Man, we have a very special guest with us today, David Young from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He preaches for the North Boulevard congregation. Actually got to hear him for the first time at the Equip conference this past year. And some of the things that he said, man, were so encouraging to me and so uplifting and really, even through his book. He has a book entitled A New Day. I want to encourage all of you to read it. I'd love to put it into your hands. He did a phenomenal job with the book, and again, that has made a huge impact on my life. And so we're very fortunate to get David here with us this weekend. David met with our elders yesterday, and myself and Daryl, and man, it was so encouraging, so uplifting. And I've gotten to know him through all of this, and I'd like to consider David a friend. He has been very helpful to me. And so I am honored to be able to introduce him to you today. I hope you guys will encourage him as well, and I hope you're encouraged by the message he brings us today from God's Word.
Thank you, Slate. How nice of you. I'm just delighted to be with you guys. And I feel like I belong to the club already because I'm married to a Julie as well. So I think one of the requirements of being an elder here is to be married to a Julie, and one of the staff member requirements. And so my Julie couldn't come today, but it is just awesome to be here with you. Actually, speaking of my Julie, she asked me, I told her, I said, why don't you come down with me? She said, this is what my wife said. She said, why in the world do they want you? That's what my wife said. Anyway, so I did say to her, I said, well, do you know how few truly great speakers there are in this world? And she said, well, there's one less than you're thinking right now. So Jesus says a prophet's without honor at home, and so he's always right. I got to tell you this. So I was living in Overland Park, working for a church in Overland Park for a couple of years, and a guy by the name of Harold Ensley had retired and moved to our congregation. Harold Ensley has the longest running television program in history. It was called The Fisherman's Friend, The Sportsman's Friend. He had two different names, and maybe some of you even saw it. He taught everybody how to fish. Clint Eastwood. I've got pictures of him fishing with Ronald Reagan, no kidding. He fished with the whole cast of Gunsmoke. So this is what he did. Then he had a radio program, a television program, and so forth. And he was a member of our church, and we thought we could have a Harold Ensley appreciation dinner and maybe draw a crowd and maybe, use the crowd to kind of reach people for Jesus. And also, we had a Harold Ensley dinner at our church, and we had the teenagers serve. So, there's a big crowd there. It was like 300-something people. 2 previous governors of the state of Kansas were there. Like the second in command at Walmart, because Walmart sells his products. He was there. All these like legislators and all. So we're sitting at the head table. I'm getting ready to introduce Ensley. They're doing the meal, and they bring out the plate, and they have a roll. You know how all the banquet meals are exactly the same. Green beans, a roll, and a piece of chicken. So we're there, and they have a little pat of butter. You know these little pads of butter? They bring a pat of butter out, and Harold Ensley looks at the teenage guy who's serving. He says, can I get another pat of butter? And the guy says, no, we only have 1 pad per person. All right, so like Ensley's really he is a great guy. He's really full of himself too. And he says, son, do you know who I am? And the boy said, no, sir, I don't. He said, I'm Harold Ensley. The dinner is named after me. He said, there's 2 ex-governors of the state of Kansas sitting here. Come to hear me. There is a second in command at Walmart. He's come to hear me. 300 people have come to hear me. They're going to ask me to autograph their fishing rods at the end of this. That's who I am. And the boy goes, okay, you know who I am? And Ensley says, no, I don't. He said, I'm the guy in charge of the butter, and you're only getting 1 pad today. So, you feel like that, when you come, you get a nice introduction. It's like, well, in the end, I'm just in charge of the butter, I guess. But I have something really specific I want to do with you. And I've discovered that it's one of those things that it's a challenge that is a real restoration of things. I believe in restoration. It's a challenge of a real restoration of things. I'm going to start with the text. Actually, I decided, here's the problem with me, is I never do what I prepare, ever. And so I'm going to skip like 400 slides here, and you're just going to have to not pay attention until I say pay attention. But I want to start here. Matthew chapter 28, verses 18, 19, and 20. So you've heard me say this in the Bible hour. I said this, and I say this pretty regularly. My belief is Jesus' final command must be my first priority. Think about famous last words. How many people, if you knew that you had just, a few moments left to live, and you had the option of picking your last words, you would pick words that really mattered. You want the last words ringing in your ear. By the way, my mother died in 2002. And my mother was she was a good woman, but she had a lot of depression, and she just kind of had a hard life. And we grew up poor. My family was poor, and so I remember my mother not being very happy in life. Now, she wasn't a bad mother; she just wasn't a happy person. She had a lot of inner turmoil. And she called me in early March of 2002. I was living in Kansas City. She was living not too far from where we are now. She called me up and she said, "I just want you to know, the last 2 years of my life, they started working for a church." My dad, and after he retired from business, he started preaching his first sermon. And she loved it. And so she called him. She said, "I just want you to know, I'm happier than I've ever been. And I finally feel like God has been good to me. And I love you to death, David." And 2 days later, she dropped dead of a heart attack. Think of the gift God gave me in that. Those are my mother's last words to me, her last words to me. If you got to pick your last words, wouldn't they be important to you? So here are Jesus' last words in the Gospel of Matthew. He says it, same in Mark, Luke, John, and even in the first chapter of Acts. But I picked Matthew because it just seems to be as pointed as you can get. Jesus says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and behold, I will be with you always, even to the end of the ages." I want to suggest making disciples is the purpose of the church. And the reason I think we have to focus on that is because I think a lot of churches have suffered from mission drift. We've let other things become our mission. And when you let other things become your mission, you fail at the only thing that really matters, which is reaching a lost world with the message of Jesus Christ. You remember what Jesus says in Luke chapter 19? He goes to the house of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is a tax collector. Jesus shows him love maybe for the first time. Tax collectors in Jesus' day were traitors because they took money from the people of God and they gave it to the Roman Empire, the oppressors of the people of God. This guy is robbing from God's people and giving it to God's enemies. Jesus goes to his house. He confronts him with his personal grace. And this guy says, "I'm going to give 4 times back what I've stolen." And Jesus says, "That's great, the great things that happen on this house." And then Jesus says, "For I have come to seek and save that which was lost." That's why Jesus came. And if I am the body of Jesus, if we are the bride of Jesus, if we are the temple of the Holy Spirit, if we are the family of God, we must have the same mission Jesus had. Jesus came to make disciples of all nations, and that's my mission too. What I want to challenge you to do is not really think about this congregation for the next 30 minutes, ever how long I go. It won't be 30, but it'll be close to it. Don't think so much about the congregation. Here's my challenge. To you, and to you, and to you, I'm asking you personally to say, my mission in life is to make disciples of all nations. And I wonder, are you ready to say that? So we did a survey at our church a couple of years ago, and we asked teenagers and college students, what's your mission in life? What's your mission in life? Now, we did it in church. So think about it. If you're sitting in church and the preacher gets up and asks you to do a survey and asks you the question, what's your mission in life? Your preacher does it. You're in church. There's Bibles, crosses, songs all around you and all. Don't you think somebody would have thought to say something like to worship God or something like that? Not a single person wrote that. The answers we got were like, my mission is to be filthy rich, to retire when I'm 30, to marry a beautiful woman. I mean, to have a great career, to be happy all my life. And I thought to myself, how can this be? Who's been preaching to this group? Yeah, it was me. Hang on. You know, when I get irritable like that, I have to drink water. Water. Nobody said it. So I'm asking you this question. When you leave this room this morning, at least I want you to say yes or no. You can say no. You and God can work that out. It's not my business, but you can work it out with God. But I want you to leave and say, my job is to make disciples of all nations. That's why I'm here. That's my mission in life. And I'm telling you, that is David Young's personal mission. I want to make disciples of all nations. I don't know how. I mean, I know it starts with my next door neighbors. It starts with the people that are in my sphere of influence. I know that God has called me to do this. And I also know it's deeply satisfying when I do. And I know that the restlessness that my soul feels, a restlessness that comes because sometimes I don't remember my mission, my restlessness goes away when I know why I'm here and I do it. Now you think about it. Some of y'all you've had dogs. You get like we got a black lab, or she's a black lab mix. Angie is a good dog, big old dog, 100 pounds. And when we first got Angie as a puppy, she was a pound puppy. We took her to the vet. And by the way, we ended up paying $300 for a pound puppy. And I told my wife, why just buy a thoroughbred if we're going to pay that much for a pound puppy? But anyway, that's what it cost us. I threw that in for free. That's just free advice. When we got Angie, the vet says to us, he says, now let me tell you, she's going to chew on something. She's going to chew on something. You get to decide what she's going to chew on. You ever heard that? You get to decide what she's going to chew on. So we got her bones and sticks, everything we could think of, so she wouldn't chew up the house. And it worked. I'm going to tell you something. You have a mission in life. You're going to have a mission. You just got to decide what it's going to be. But if you think I don't have a mission, I don't know what my mission is, I got news for you. You do have a mission. It's just your mission is a lost mission right now. Your mission is probably not worth having. Your mission is not going to bring you the happiness you think it's going to bring you. If you want a real purpose, if you really want to live the way God designed you to live, get in step with the mission of Jesus. The mission of Jesus is to make disciples of everybody. Now, I want you to see how Jesus does this. In fact, this is kind of, in a sense, maybe the burden of the sermon. Let me just do this while I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm a chaotic thinker sometimes. I want you to see why what I'm about to say, why I think it really does matter. I think for a lot of us, we think, well, as long as I go to church or as long as got kind of a Christian religion about me, that's my mission. I just want you to know that's not what the Bible says. You know that the phrase religious person never occurs in the Bible. There's a sense in which Jesus sets us free from religion. All the restraints of religion, the pains of religion, Jesus calls us to have a relationship with Him, like you guys have right here. I love seeing this. I've not been called to a new religion. I've been called to a relationship with the God, a living God, a real relationship that makes a real difference in my life. Not just another set of rules. I didn't swap out one set of rules for another set of rules. I entered into a covenant with the God of the universe. Now, when Jesus talks about this, the Bible uses the term Christian 3 times. It's a great term. In fact, you're told in 1 Peter, don't be ashamed to be called a Christian. So don't be. In fact, in the 21st century in America, we need to say this over and over again. Do not be ashamed to be called a Christian. Don't be ashamed of it. Wear it proudly. But I do want you to know, Jesus uses terms like disciple making almost 300 times in the New Testament. And let me tell you why it matters. When I say the word Christian, a lot of people get one idea. But when I say disciple making, they get a very different idea. Now I have to pause and give you just one comment here. Some of us remember a disciple-making movement in our fellowship started in the late 1970s and really went for about 25 years. Those who were in it, those who were in that disciple-making movement, many of them, very many, hundreds, thousands of them say it was a manipulative, controlling, very hurtful movement. I want you to know I'm not talking about that. I distance myself from that. I don't support that. That's not what Jesus did. Jesus didn't come manipulate people. Jesus didn't set up a pyramid structure where everybody reported to the guy on the top. Except for him, he's on the top. He didn't put some human on the top. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is this. Let me show you what the scriptures say about it. Let me go through all this. I want to take you right straight to some scriptures. Yep. I told you we were going to go fast. Don't you wish every sermon was this fast? I mean, think you'd be eating right now. Hang on. Okay, here we go. Here's what I want you to see. Watch how disciple making works in the Bible. So we're going to start right here with Moses and Joshua. So Moses spends an enormous amount of time training Joshua, the son of Nun, Joshua ben Nun, they say in Hebrew, and giving him the wisdom, laying hands on him so that Joshua can rise up and become the man God wants him to be. Moses discipled Joshua. Here's another one. Elijah handpicks Elisha. He spends all this time with Elisha. He trains Elisha to be a man of God, a prophet of God. And then Elijah takes his mantle off, gives it to Elisha and says, here you go. And Elisha takes over the place that Elijah had served. He discipled him. Here's one. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 13, he says that he had basically a son named John Mark. This is the John Mark that wrote the Gospel of Mark. Peter discipled Mark, and now today we read Mark's Gospel, and millions, billions of lives have been changed by what Peter did in the life of Mark. Paul takes young Timothy. Paul said, listen to how intense their relationship was. Paul says about Timothy, you know everything there is to know about me. You know my way of life, my teaching, my purpose, my faith, my patience, my love, my endurance, my persecution, my sufferings. Paul discipled Timothy and taught Timothy how to be what God wanted Timothy to be. In fact, Paul says this is the general rule. He says to Timothy, what you heard from me, now I want you to go teach other people, and then I want them to teach others. That's the best description of disciple making I know of. Our youth minister, David Skidmore, has this written up on his wall in the teen area. 2 Timothy 2:2, which is, my job is always to be leading someone else to Jesus. Always. I should have somebody who's helping me stay straight, and I need to be helping somebody else stay straight. Women, here's how Paul puts it in Titus chapter 2. He says, you who are older women need to be training the younger women. And then he goes on in this text. I've just given you a short version. He says you need to train them to love their husbands, train them to be godly, train them not to be gossips. He goes through all these things that he wants older women to do. So here's my question. Is this your mission? I don't mean as a church, I mean you individually. How many of you are older women? I'm not picking on the older women, but maybe I am for a minute. Let me pick on the older women. I'll do you first. Then after I'll go after the older men, and we'll make it even here. But think about this. How many of you older women are training younger women to live God-like lives? Because here's my experience, and I don't mean to be harsh. My experience is that some of our people get to a certain age and they say, well, it's not my problem anymore. And they sit back and they just say, I want somebody to take care of me now. Think about it. How many of our women's classes are taught by the younger women's instead of the older women? We have a women's Bible class or ladies' Bible class, and there may be 50 or 60 people in there who are 60 years old, and they call a 30-year-old to come teach the class. I'm not criticizing that, but I'm just going to say in the Bible, older women are supposed to be training younger women. If you're wondering, am I an older woman? If you're wondering about that, you are. Just telling you. If you have to ask, do I qualify as an older woman? Then yes, you do. You are, right? Because like if you're 18 right now, you know I'm not talking to you. But if you're thinking, is he talking to me? Then yes, I am. I am. Let me ask this. We've got young women in here right now who have children. So Jill and I have raised 2 kids, and it pretty much, just sucked the life out of us. We come home at night and it's just this, and I kept thinking one day it'd get better. Well, it did, but there's nothing left of me to enjoy what better is. So there you go. I'm going to tell you, a young woman in here who's got kids she may not know this, she would give her right arm to have an older woman come into her life and mentor her in how to be a good mother. And if you're thinking, well, I can't do that. Yes, you can. You're commanded to do that. And by the way, you men are too. I can tell you that I didn't know what it was to be a man until 3 elders adopted me at my church. I've been there 2 stretches, a total of 25 years. When I moved to North Boulevard, I was 32 years old. I was 31 years old. We hadn't had kids yet. We grew up, I'm not trying to overstate it, but we grew up kind of poor. And I didn't know anything. I had 1 pair of pants when I was a kid. And then overalls. I alternated between overalls and a pair of pants. And I thought, that's fabulous, fine with me. By the way, I'd love to go back to overalls. If y'all ever do that, I'm going to be part of that. And I'm not running for Pope, but if you elect me, I will serve as Pope, and I will make overalls standard wear again, because I remember those days. You can see I'm hard on a belt right here. So here's what I'm saying. These 3 elders adopted me. Tom Beatty, who just went to meet Jesus about 6 months ago. Joe Mays, who's had 2 strokes now and can barely speak, who's the most angelic man of God I've ever known, and Bob Webb, who's still one of our elders. They took me to lunch every day of the week. They just called me up, hey, you want to have lunch? Yeah, sure. And we'd sit there at lunch and they would talk to me about what it means to be a man of God. Tom Beatty taught me that you open a door for women. I don't know why I didn't know that. That sounds small, but it's not. Tom Beatty never failed to show politeness and love. I'll get all choked up here in a second. And kindness. You never could pay for lunch if Tom was around. He would fight you to the ground to pay for your lunch. Because he just wanted you, he just was a man of great integrity and respect. He's an awesome man of God. That's who taught me what it means to be a man of God. Joe Mays, I've seen Joe Mays down on his knees begging God in prayer. I've seen him on his knees begging God in prayer. I watched that. You can't get that in a program. You don't get that in a program. Elisha didn't get that by joining some ministry. He got it because Elijah showed it to him. Joshua didn't become a great champion of God because he went to some program on champions for the men of God. He didn't watch YouTube videos on how to lead people into the promised land. He got it because he had a man of God like Moses who said, I'm here for you, man. I'm going to help you become what God has called you to be. Tom Beatty, Bob Webb, and Joe Mays did that for me. Those men changed my life. And their wives got involved in my wife's life. And they made our marriage an awesome marriage because I got to see how they loved each other. Bob Webb adores his wife. I would watch Bob Webb love on his wife and I would think, well, I can do that for my wife. I didn't even know she needed it. I grew up with brothers. In my house growing up, if you liked somebody, you slapped them. I'm not joking. Like my brothers and I, if we see each other today, if my brother walked in right now, I would have to resist the urge to slap him in the face. And if I did, you would think I'm insane, but he would know, hey, I still love him because I just hit him. That's how we did it. So I get married to a woman who grew up with 3 sisters. And oh my goodness, I can't even tell you what that was like. I had to learn a whole lot. So I'm watching these guys. They just showed me what it's like to be a man of God. Anything that I feel like I am today, I owe to those guys. I mean, Danny, I think you said this. You didn't give me permission to tell this, but when you went to Bellevue, you guys started going to Predator games. They were trying to get you to become a member, so what do? They take you to Pred games. Suddenly, next thing you know, they're best friends in life, and all of a sudden you love that church. You're still talking about that church. That's what disciple making is. Forget all the nonsense that was raging down in the 70s and 80s. That's not disciple making. That's manipulations. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about doing what Jesus did. Watch how Jesus did this. Let me just show you a few texts. Again, let's go through this stuff fast. Watch Jesus here. Okay, Jesus appoints 12. He designates them to be apostles, Mark chapter 3, so they can be with him, so he can send them out, and so they can have authority. That's disciple making. I'm going to tell you a story about it here in just a second. So Jesus shares himself with them. Watch this. Jesus says to them in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 19, come follow me and I'll teach you how to catch other people. By the way, that's disciple making. Come follow me and I'll teach you how to catch somebody else. And then watch what Jesus does. He has dinner with them. He's with them at work. He takes them up on the mountain. He actually reclines he's so close to John, the apostle, that John eats with his head up against Jesus' chest. It's weird in America, but that's how people ate back then. And only the guy you were closest to could get that close to you. That's very right. Don't bait me, man. Don't bait me. I'm trying to get you out on time. You keep doing that, we're all in trouble. Yeah. In antiquity, you know how Romans used to eat? They would eat in a circle, laying on their side. You've seen this, the triclinium. So they would lay on their side, and this guy would lay against this guy, and he would stagger, and you would make a circle, and the food would be in the middle. One time at church, I wanted to show the church how to do this. I said, well, I need about 5 guys to come up and volunteer, and I'm going to show them how to do it. Well, they came up, and I said, now, y'all need to lie down with your heads next to each other's chest. My church still doesn't know what it looks like, because they all turned around and walked back to their pews. They weren't going to do that. But Jesus did. Jesus did it. Look at this. He says about his disciples, he points out to his disciples, says, this is my mother, these are my brothers, this is my family. Jesus enters into the life of people. Let me just show you the scriptures. He enters into the life of people to change their lives forever. So he says, love one another. I'm going to stop right here. I want to get you some scriptures because I want to kind of get you to this place where you can walk out and say, okay, I know what David asked me to do today. Here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to find people who need to become like Jesus and love them enough to lead them there. If it's lost people, start with lost people. Listen, this world has plenty of lost people and they need you. But you can also find people like, I was a preacher when those 3 elders discipled me. They took me, we didn't use that language, by the way. We didn't know to use that language. They just loved me. I owe my life to those guys. I can't tell you how much I do. I owe my life to those 3 men. They loved me enough to share their lives with me. As Paul says he did with Timothy and the Thessalonians, I loved you enough to share my life with you. And they changed me. A program couldn't have done that. A YouTube video couldn't have done it. A book couldn't have done it. But you can. Do it with your children. Husbands, you can do it with your wives. You can do it with your lost next door neighbors. You can do it with one another. So at North Boulevard, what we say to people is, everybody ought to be discipling somebody. And for the last 3 or 4 years, we've kind of gone through the church with a razor blade, and we've said if it's not discipling, we don't want to spend too many of our resources on it, because we believe that one day we got to stand before a God, and we don't want anybody lost, not anybody. So what I'm encouraging you to do is not just have the perfect message of Jesus. Jesus' message is perfect, but his method is pretty good too. His method was to call 12 guys, spend his life with them for 3 years, loving on them, eating with them, teaching them, pulling them aside, doing ministry with them, sending them out to preach. And then after 3 years, what did he say to them? Matthew 28. Now you go make disciples of all nations. I think it's the missing ingredient in many of our churches. We no longer expect that person to mentor someone else to follow Jesus. We don't expect people to do it. And if you don't expect it, it's not going to happen. You get what you expect. You get the standards you raise. So I'm challenging everybody in this room. Everybody in this room can lead somebody. My son's a very bright boy. He learned to read when he was about 4 years old. You know who taught him to read? My daughter. She was in kindergarten. You know what it takes to teach a 4-year-old how to read? It takes a 5-year-old. That's all it takes. So if you're thinking to yourself, I don't know that I can lead anybody else to Jesus. If you're only in kindergarten, find somebody that's 4 years old and help them come to Jesus. If you're thinking, well, I don't have all the questions they're going to ask. Listen, if they ask questions that you don't understand, I promise you when you pick up the phone, Slate's going to answer. He's going to be happy to help you. When you say, I'm trying to bring somebody to Jesus and they got a question I can't answer, you think he's going to say, well, I don't have time for that. No, he's not. He's going to be like cheering you on. Everybody in this room, including those of you who are 12 years old or 14 or 18 years old, everybody in this room can do what Jesus did. We can all make disciples of all nations. And it will be the difference between saved people and lost people. Most of you were discipled by somebody, a mama or a daddy or a coach or a teacher or an elder or a minister. Most of us were discipled by somebody. But today we live in a world where many people aren't getting that. Think of how many kids don't have daddies anymore. 40% of our kids in America don't have a dad around. Nobody's teaching them right and wrong. Nobody is. Many of our people, they don't know Jesus, and if we think that if they just come to church, they'll know Jesus. I've been preaching 40 years, almost 40 years, and I can tell you, the sermon's not going to cut it. It didn't cut it in Jesus' day. And he was a great preacher. People need to be loved. They need this. They need to be loved by you enough to bring them to Jesus. Do you love people enough to bring them to Jesus? I'm asking you to make that your life's mission. It's what he says, his last words. His last words, go make disciples. Now I'm going to end with a story. And I know this is going to go online, so I'm apologizing up front. The good news is nobody listens to me, so that might help. I don't have his permission to share it explicitly, but he's okay with me sharing this. My son is a brilliant boy, but he struggled a lot of his life. He struggled with depression, and it's been severe. It's been worse than I can talk about. And again, it's his story, it's not my story. There was a point in my son's life about 1.5 years ago, Jonathan's 21 now, where he came to me and he said, Dad, I need you to know that for the last couple of years, last 4 or 5 years, I haven't really believed in God. Now I'm a preacher. This is my son. He grew up in my church, me preaching, with the best Sunday school program in the world. He went to a Church of Christ Christian school. He went to Freed Hardeman. We had family devotionals in my house every day when he was a kid. What else could I have done? But you see, he was hurt inside. When people tell you they don't believe in God, what they mean is, I'm hurting. That's what they mean. Most people don't believe in God. What they mean is, I can't reconcile how much pain I'm feeling with the fact that there's a good God. So that's all he meant. He said, I want you to know I'm not going to live a bad life. I'm going to keep going to church. I think the Christian system is the best system. But I've prayed, I've begged God to take away this pain, and he won't, and I can't believe in him. So I said to Jonathan, this was, I don't remember, I said 1.5 years, it's probably 2 or 3 years ago. I said to John, I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You just keep talking to God. I'm going to keep talking to God, and he's going to do something. He'll do something for us. So back in March of last year, 2016, John was at university. We got a call. This is his story. I can't tell too many details. We had to go get him. We had to go rescue him. We brought him home. He was out of school. He was in terrible shape. Terrible shape. Coincidentally, about that time, we had a guy who had come to North Boulevard who was, he's a grandmaster of Taekwondo. This guy taught Joe Biden, Vice President Joe Biden, Taekwondo. He taught Sylvester Stallone Taekwondo. I'm not making this up. He lived in Washington, D.C. his whole life. He taught half the U.S. congressmen and women. This guy's a big guy. He came to North Boulevard to go to our church. John comes home. This guy's name is Ken Carlson. Ken asked me, can I take your son out to lunch? And I said, sure, anything. I mean, John was in bed all day. We couldn't get him out. He was in trouble. My son was in bad trouble, spiritually and emotionally and physically as well. So Ken asked him to go out to lunch, and John said, yeah, whatever. He goes out to lunch with him. Unbeknownst to me, Ken says to him, hey, Tony Robbins, y'all know that name, the big motivational speaker? He's a big guy. You see him on infomercials. Tony Robbins came to Ken Carlson one time and said, I want a black belt in 6 months. And Ken said, it's not possible. And Tony Robbins said, yeah, it is, and you're going to give it to me. So Ken Carlson says to my son, Tony Robbins is the only man alive who got a black belt in Taekwondo without buying it on the internet in 6 months. He says to my son, if you will give me 2 hours a day every day for the next 5 months and 3.5 weeks, you'll get a black belt, and you will have beaten Tony Robbins and been the biggest guy. My son had nothing else to do. He said, okay. So he starts going through Taekwondo. I didn't know this was happening. I just knew John was going with Ken somewhere. So all of a sudden, he'd do this Taekwondo, but then he'd sit John down for like an hour and he'd say, hey, we need to pray together. And then he would talk to John about what's going on inside of you. And John would start to confess to Ken his struggles. And then Ken would call John up and he would take him out to dinner. And Ken was leading a bunch of Bible studies. He'd take John with him to the Bible studies. And John didn't even believe. But he'd go and he'd sit there and he'd watch Ken. And I don't know what Ken did, except love my son extraordinarily so. One day, I don't know, in the middle of the summer, John comes home and asks me, can we pray together? My son. I'm like, whoa, of course we can. And he lays hands on me. And afterwards I said, what in the world happened to you? He said, oh, Ken made me do it. He's making me do that now, which we laughed at. But he kept going. In October of this past year, Jonathan Young became the world's first black belt in less than 6 months. My son did. We had 40 or 50 people gathered to watch the ceremony. By the way, Ken Carlson, who's been doing Taekwondo since he was 8 years old, presented my son with his original black belt. It was awesome. I can't tell you how awesome it was. And my son gave a speech, and in his speech, he looked at me in the eyes. He said, Dad, you remember the conversation we had? And I said, yes, I remember. And he said, the prodigal son is back. I believe in God. I love Jesus. I want to work for a church. I'm back. My son now works for a church. My son baptized his lost friend 2 weeks ago because somebody loved my son enough to get in his life. And I'm telling you this, you can do it for somebody. Jesus said, go make disciples. Who is he talking to? He's not talking to your elders. He's talking to me. He wasn't talking to somebody over at some Christian college. He's talking to us. He says to us, go make disciples. I've seen what it can do when someone loves you enough to get in your life. Every one of us can do it. So I just want to bequeath you personally with that challenge from Jesus. Sorry, I got choked up there. I wish I could tell you the miracle that's happened in my son's life. You cannot believe it. I can't even tell you what's happened. My son walks around listening to my sermons on his cell phone. It's like, well, even I don't listen to my sermons. I can't believe my son's doing it. He's reading, he just, Friday, he got in an 8-volume set of Bible commentaries, and he was dancing for joy. Says he hopes to have them all read in the next month. I can't, if you'd seen my boy a year ago, we wouldn't believe it, because somebody loved him enough to disciple him in a godlike way. Not an abusive, manipulative pyramid scheme, nothing like that. Just love, just love. So I'm giving you this challenge. You walk out of this door this morning, now I'm putting it on your head. Your blood's on your head. Sorry to say it that way. You're going to walk out this door and you're either going to have a mission of making disciples of all nations, or you're going to say no thank you. You know that, right? You're either going to have that mission or you're going to say no thank you, because I've now laid it on you. You don't have a choice. You're either going to take that mission or you're going to say no thank you. But you can't say I didn't know that was my mission. You can't say that anymore. Now you know. Now you know. So I challenge you to say, I'm going to do my part to be like Jesus and make disciples of all nations. My next door neighbor, my wife, my kids, my friends. I don't know what it is, whatever God puts in front of you. And if you are not yet a disciple, let me tell you what I know about this church. This church cares about you and loves you. And they love you enough to welcome you in, to join a family. If you don't have a family, this church will be your family. This church will they'll give you the support you need, the moral, the spiritual support. They'll be your brothers, they'll be your sisters. Remember what Jesus says? He looks at his disciples. He says, that's my mother, these are my brothers, this is my family. This church will be that for you. So if you're not a disciple, make a commitment today to do it. You put your faith in Jesus. You say, I'm tired of doing it my way, or repent of my sins. You seal the deal in baptism. It's like putting a wedding ring on. You might love Jesus before you're baptized, but you're not married to him until you are. And if you've lost your mission, I challenge you to recover it. Go make disciples of all nations. If we can help you, you let us know. We'll stand up, we'll sing.